You think you've already understood love. But the truth is, when spiritual awakening happens, everything you believed about loving and being loved simply ceases to make sense. And I need to warn you, after that switch flips, you'll never be able to go back to the old way of relating. Because loving without awakening is living in draft mode. It's confusing attachment with affection, control with care, dependence with passion, and then suddenly, when your consciousness opens, you realize that the love you've sought your whole life was just a weak copy of the real thing. Today I'm going to show you what truly changes within you when you awaken, and why ordinary people think you've become cold, detached, or even strange. But don't worry, this isn't coldness, it's evolution. You'll understand why love ceases to be anxiety and becomes presence, why jealousy loses its power, why that need for approval simply dies, and most importantly, why those who are still spiritually asleep will never be able to understand love as you're about to understand it. If you've ever felt that traditional love suffocates you or seems too small for the size of your soul, stay with me. Because after this video, you'll see love in a way no one has shown you before, and you'll realize that maybe you're already awakening and didn't even know it. Get ready, because your concept of love is about to change. Now you see love with a new clarity, and that changes everything in your life. You've just gained a perspective that many people spend their entire lives searching for and never find. And that's how the transformation begins. Understanding that conscious love and mature love are not fantasy, but real evolution. This content has opened up space within you for a new way of relating, without fear, without neediness, without begging for attention. That in itself is growth. And on this path, you don't walk alone. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because each video here is a new piece of the awakening puzzle. Sharing this simple gesture is your way of giving back to the universe and continuing to receive even more. This is where your consciousness reaches the next level. Have you ever noticed how many people talk about love as if it were a mission to find the other half? As if life were a race to find someone who fills all the empty spaces, cures all the fears, and even solves all the inner insecurities. But when you begin to awaken spiritually, this logic simply crumbles. You look back and think, how could I have thought that's what love was all about? It's almost strange to remember how much we believed that happiness depended on another person arriving with a magic key to open a door inside us. When consciousness begins to expand, the first realization is this: love isn't about completing someone or being completed. It's about overflowing, not filling holes. Before awakening, it's normal to believe that the lack you feel is the lack of someone else. But afterward, you realize that this lack was always a lack of yourself. And then everything changes. The truth is, while we're on autopilot, we treat love like a contract. I give you this, you give me that. It's almost a commercial exchange disguised as romance. And of course nobody admits this out loud, but behavior gives it away. Does the person distance themselves a little? You already think something is wrong. Does the other person not do what you imagined? You already feel rejected. It's an endless emotional roller coaster. And all this comes from a very simple place to understand: neediness. Emotional neediness disguised as deep passion. It's nobody's fault. It's just the way we were taught. The problem is that this is tiring, exhausting, and sooner or later turns into suffering. When you start to wake up, you realize that the romantic love they sold us is more about fear than about connection. Fear of being alone, fear of not being enough, fear of losing. Then you hear that famous phrase, whoever loves cares, but they never told you that sometimes caring becomes controlling, suffocating, monitoring. And when you awaken spiritually, you begin to notice these details with absurd clarity. The most curious thing is that at first, this might even scare you. You think, so the love I've felt so far was wrong? No, it wasn't wrong. It was just limited. It was love sleeping. And that's okay. It's part of life. Everyone experiences this kind of love at some point, but now you begin to realize something much more powerful. No one can give you what you haven't yet found within yourself. And this doesn't mean becoming an isolated monk or not needing anyone. It means discovering that when you are whole, love ceases to be a crutch and becomes a choice. To love is not to escape emptiness. To love is to celebrate fullness. The difference is gigantic. When you awaken, you stop looking for someone to save you and start looking for someone to walk alongside. And then, when a person appears who isn't afraid of your freedom and doesn't demand that you diminish who you are just to fit into their world, you recognize them, not as the other half, but as someone who has also found themselves. Of course, this doesn't mean everything becomes perfect. You don't become an illuminated statue that never feels jealousy, never feels fear, or never gets hurt. You still feel everything, but now you feel it consciously. You don't react automatically. You don't despair, because you know that true love isn't about holding on to someone tightly so you don't lose them. It's about having so much presence and truth that the other person chooses to stay. This is the kind of transformation that changes the entire way you relate to others. And at this point in the journey, something very powerful begins to emerge within you. You realize that before the awakening, you confused intensity with love. But now you begin to understand that the deepest love is sometimes silent, light, and peaceful. It doesn't need drama to exist. By the way, let me take this opportunity to ask you something that might further open your mind. When you think about your way of loving, do you think you were looking for someone to share your life with, or someone to carry your loneliness for you? Answer in the comments with the word "wake up" so I know you're here with me in this reflection and that it makes sense to you. This also helps other people read and reflect along with me. And you can't even imagine how your comment can touch someone. When consciousness begins to awaken, something very uncomfortable happens. You realize how much you've tried to control love your whole life. And there's no point in pretending otherwise. Everyone has done it. You wanted quick answers. You wanted the person to demonstrate it in a certain way. You wanted certainties, guarantees, total security, almost as if love were something you could put in a safe and lock forever. But the truth is simple. When you awaken, you understand that love was never about holding someone captive, but about walking together freely. Before, you confused stability with control. You thought that good jealousy was romantic. You thought it was beautiful when someone said, "You are my life," as if that were the greatest proof of love in the world. But deep down, all of that is disguised fear. When you awaken, you see very clearly that the most beautiful love is not the one that says, "You are mine," but the one that says, "I choose you every day, not because I need to, but because I want to." And this can be a real shock because most people have been raised to believe that good love is guaranteed love. How can you let the person be free? How can you trust the flow? It even seems risky, right? But look at the paradox. The more you try to guarantee that someone loves you, the further away true love becomes. Control creates distance, suffocates, dries up what should be alive. Have you noticed how some relationships start out wonderfully and suddenly turn into a silent competition to see who's in charge, who defines everything, who has emotional power? That's it. When you wake up, you understand that this was never love. It was an ego battle. Adult love is not about domination. It's about partnership. It's about looking at the other person and thinking, "I don't want to possess you. I want to see you grow, and I want to grow with you." And here's the key point. Awakened love trusts. It's not that blind, naive trust that pretends there will never be pain. It's mature trust. It's knowing that controlling someone doesn't prevent betrayal, doesn't prevent abandonment, doesn't prevent the end. Control only wears down the present while trying to avoid the future. And those who awaken understand something that changes everything. The only way to avoid losing someone is to not try to hold on too tightly. It seems contradictory, but it's liberating. You discover that when you give space, love breathes. When you give trust, love flourishes. When you give freedom, love becomes a choice and it chooses you back. Of course, this doesn't mean becoming a Zen being, floating and smiling while everything happens. Are there still insecurities? Yes. Do you still get that nervous feeling in your stomach from time to time? Yes. But now you're not a prisoner of it. You don't act out of fear. You act out of awareness. Before, any curt response would trigger an abandonment alarm. Now you observe. You breathe. You talk. The difference lies in what motivates you. Before it was fear of losing. Now it's respect for yourself and for the other person. And when love ceases to be a prison and becomes a choice, it becomes much lighter, more enjoyable, and real. Those who need to dominate live in war. Those who trust live in peace. Now answer me this honestly. Have you ever noticed that, in a relationship, you tried to be in control to feel secure? Go ahead, everyone's been through it. Comment below with the word freedom so I can see who's also experiencing this awakening. And seriously, when you write, you're not just interacting with me, you're reinforcing this new awareness within yourself. It sounds silly, but it makes a difference. And you know what's most interesting? When you start experiencing love like this, other people find it strange. They say, "You've changed. You're distant. You don't love like you used to." But the truth is, now you truly love, not desperately. However, there's a detail that comes right after this understanding, and that's where many people freeze. When you let go of control, an enormous peace begins to emerge, but so does an unexpected emotional challenge that no one tells you about. Do you know that feeling of always waiting for something to happen in a relationship? That hidden tension in your chest, that need to read signs all the time, that habit of imagining scenarios in your head even before reality happens? Will he answer me? Does she still feel the same way? Did I do something wrong? Am I losing this person? Before spiritual awakening, this seems normal. Most people live like this and even call it intensity, passion, true love. But when you begin to awaken, an uncomfortable truth appears. That wasn't love, it was anxiety. It was fear of losing, disguised as romance. And it hurts to admit that, I know. But at the same time, it's liberating. When consciousness expands, you begin to realize that much of the emotional suffering doesn't come from what the other person does, but from the stories you create in your mind about what might happen. You understand that the fear of being less important, of being forgotten, of not being chosen, was much more about you and your self-image than about the relationship itself. And then something powerful happens. You stop living in fear of losing and begin to live in the pleasure of being together. Before, loving was like walking on a floor that could break at any moment. After awakening, you understand that if the floor breaks, you know how to walk alone. And that certainty alone lifts an enormous weight from your chest. And here's something curious. When that inner security arrives, the other person notices. Not because you become cold, but because you become whole. You don't send messages expecting a response to validate your importance. You send them because you wanted to share something, because you care, because you're present. You don't associate momentary absence with a lack of love. You stop transforming any silence from the other person into an emotional threat. And that changes the game. The relationship ceases to be a cycle of demands, anxiety, and relief, and becomes a space of real exchange, where each person breathes, lives, grows, and returns to the other, not out of fear of losing them, but because it's good to be there. The truth is, before awakening, many people love like someone clinging to a life raft. Afterward, you love like someone who swims, because you already know how to float. And that doesn't mean you no longer feel longing, desire, jealousy, or longing. It means you feel all of that without losing your peace. You don't let your emotions drive your life. They hitch a ride and you hold the steering wheel. In fact, want to test if you're in this process? Notice what happens when someone doesn't reciprocate your message or attention in the time you expected. If your heart aches and your mind starts creating theories, there's still room for healing. If you think it's okay, life is happening, you're moving forward. That's how the difference begins. Small at first, gigantic later. And for you to see for yourself how much you're transforming, comment below with the word peace, because peace is what truly begins to grow within you when awakening touches your way of loving. I want to see who's feeling this happening, and it's curious how simple this seems, but it completely changes the energy you bring to the relationship. Anxious people create distance trying to hold on. Awakened people create connection simply by existing truthfully. And when you learn to trust the flow, instead of forcing control and guarantees, something even deeper emerges. Because there's a next step that almost no one tells you about, and it arrives silently. When you begin to trust in love, you also begin to see the other person's individuality in a way that would have scared you before. But now, it sets you free. When you begin to awaken spiritually, something very curious happens in the way you perceive love. Suddenly you realize that the other person doesn't exist to complete you, nor to live up to your expectations. It seems obvious, I know, but before this understanding, we like to believe we are mature in love, until we notice how frustrated we get when the person doesn't act, feel, or react the way they should. The truth is, Before awakening, we don't love the person. We love the idea we've created of them. And any movement outside of that idea becomes a threat. When you awaken, that idea falls apart. You stop trying to fit the other person into a mold and begin to see who that person really is, with space to be, live, grow, and even change. And that's where the challenge begins. Accepting the individuality of another requires accepting your own individuality first. As long as you still believe you need someone to be the way you want them to be, to feel secure, you're not loving. You're making an emotional contract. But in awakened love, you understand that each human being carries a history, a rhythm, a way of feeling, and their own path. You stop trying to mold and begin to observe, respect, and even admire what is different. And this change hurts at first. You know why? Because letting go of control means facing the reality that nothing, absolutely nothing, belongs to you, not even the other person's emotions. You don't own what they feel, think, or choose. You are only part of their path, just as they are part of yours. And when that understanding arrives, the relationship shifts in energy. Instead of trying to fix the person, you begin to support their growth. Instead of demanding that they love in your specific way, you learn to see the beauty in their way of loving. This doesn't mean tolerating disrespect, lack of reciprocity, or emotional irresponsibility. Awakening isn't about being naive. It simply means abandoning unrealistic expectations and making room for a true connection, where love isn't about demands but about exchange, where you can look at the other person and say, "I see you." And that's where one of the most beautiful experiences is born. Loving someone not for what they give you, but for who they are. Do you know where many people get stuck? In the fear of losing. The mind says, if I let the other person be free, I might be left behind. But here's the irony. When you accept the other person's individuality, you become precisely the kind of person no one wants to leave, because you don't weigh them down, you don't suffocate them, you don't control them, you inspire them. That's how awakened love works. Instead of holding on, it invites. Instead of demanding, it makes space. And you begin to realize that loving someone who is complete doesn't diminish you. It strengthens you. You don't want a reflection of yourself. You want a whole human being. Now let me ask you something, and answer honestly. Have you ever realized you were trying to adjust someone to your way of loving? Like trying to change details, behaviors, rhythm, or even the way the person expresses affection? If so, comment below with the word true. It's not about showing off. It's about recognition. And those who recognize transform. And pay attention. Accepting the other person's individuality not only changes the relationship, but also changes how you relate to yourself. But when that happens, something even deeper emerges. Something many people feel but can't name. Because when you stop controlling and start respecting, a new sensation appears that, at first, surprises you. Love begins to feel peaceful, and then the ego panics, because it has been conditioned to believe that love without drama is love without emotion. But there's a hidden truth in this, and that's where the journey gets even more interesting, because peace in love has an impact that many people never imagined, and that's what we're going to delve into now. There's something nobody tells you about spiritual awakening. Love begins to calm down. And not the boring calm some people imagine, but the kind of calm that gives security, that gives peace, that gives space to breathe. It's as if, after years of living relationships like an emotional roller coaster, you suddenly realize you no longer need that adrenaline to feel alive. Before awakening, we confuse intensity with depth. We think good love is love that hurts, that stirs things up, that shakes, that leaves you without solid ground. But after your consciousness opens, you realize that was never love. It was emotional dependence mixed with anxiety. True love doesn't throw you against the emotional wall every week. True love gives you solid ground. And this part is funny because at first, when this calmness appears, you find it strange. It seems like something is missing. The ego, accustomed to drama, thinks, have I stopped loving? Has it cooled down? Is there no more passion? But it's not an absence of feeling. It's maturity. It's the end of emotional addiction. You finally stop confusing intensity with chaos. And when that happens, you stop creating problems where there aren't any just to feel movement. Many people think they need constant arguments, tension, jealousy, fights to prove that love is real. But awakening shows you that love doesn't need chaos to be alive. It finds beauty in simplicity, in silence, in a peaceful gaze, in a presence that speaks effortlessly. And I'll be very direct. Those who are still spiritually asleep find this love boring, because those accustomed to turbulence find landing strange. But those who awaken understand. Peace is the greatest sign of true love. Not that dead, shallow peace, but that peace you feel in your body that makes you take a deep breath and think, I can be myself here. There is nothing deeper than that. When love becomes inner silence, you don't live to prove anything, nor to be admired all the time, nor to compete over who feels more. You simply exist, and that is enough. And in that space, the relationship gains quality. The touch changes, the conversations change, the presence changes. There's no need for spectacle because the truth is there, and that's enough. And here's something curious. Some people around you might start calling you colder, more distant, more emotionally closed off. In reality, you haven't become cold. You've become more aware. You no longer react with despair. You don't create drama in your head over everything. You don't turn every gesture into an emotional judgment. You've learned to feel without losing yourself, and that, to many people, seems like coldness. But it's just balance. And there's a huge freedom when you realize you no longer need drama to feel loved. Love becomes what it should always have been, a safe place, not an emotional battlefield. Now, let me ask you something. Can you tell that when love is peaceful, your mind finally becomes quiet? Have you ever felt that before? Comment below with the word inner peace, so I know you're feeling this transformation coming. When you write, you anchor yourself in that state and inspire other people who are reading as well. But there's a part of this journey that many people don't expect, because when you find that calm, that presence, that emotional maturity, something much bigger begins to happen. You start to see love not as something that exists only between you and one person, but as something that begins to overflow into your whole life. As spiritual awakening deepens, you begin to realize something that changes everything. Love is no longer confined to a relationship. It becomes a way of seeing the world. Before, love was focused on one person, and sometimes even on an obsession. This person is my world. After your consciousness opens, you understand that love is the world. You begin to feel a different connection with everything around you. People, moments, nature, silence, even yourself. It's not that pretty social media discourse, it's lived experience. Life begins to make sense in a simple and at the same time immense way. You realize that before, you loved with fear. Fear of losing, fear of not being reciprocated, fear of not being enough. After this awakening, you love with presence. Love ceases to be an exchange and becomes a state of being. You don't love just to receive something in return. You love because it's now part of your essence. This changes how you kneel before life, how you deal with people, how you accept what comes and understand what goes. It's as if you realize that loving someone deeply doesn't limit you. It expands you. It broadens your capacity for connection with everything. The person you choose to walk alongside becomes part of that love, not its absolute center. And look at this powerful transformation. When you stop seeking a relationship as the primary source of love, the relationship you have becomes stronger. Because it's no longer based on lack, but on choice. You don't demand that the other person be your everything, nor do you position yourself as anyone's emotional savior. You understand that each person is responsible for their own light, and that true love is when two lights walk together, without trying to extinguish, control, or swallow the other's light. This understanding brings maturity, freedom, and even gratitude for the individuality and depth of life. You begin to see beauty in small details you never paid attention to before. Presence becomes your new way of loving. And do you know the clear sign that you've reached this level? You begin to feel a silent love for the simple fact of being alive. For the passing wind, for ordinary moments, for someone's smile, for a deep conversation, for your own company. You stop seeking validation in the external world and begin to feel that something complete already exists within you. And when this feeling appears, nothing can enslave you emotionally anymore. You become free to truly love. People who are still trapped in conditional love may think you're distant. But the truth is, you're closer to life than ever before. Now answer me honestly. Have you ever felt, even for a moment, that love that seems bigger than a single person? That love that makes you breathe deeper and feel that everything makes sense? If you have, comment below with the word expansion. I want to see who is experiencing this turning point. And when you comment, it's not just for me, it's for you to reinforce this awareness within yourself and to inspire someone who may still be discovering this path. And pay attention now, because there's something essential here. When you reach this point, life begins to test you in a different way. Awakening doesn't end with love, it deepens. And there's a stage that catches many people off guard, because it seems contrary to all of this. But in reality, it's what solidifies this new way of loving and living. It's the moment when life asks, did you really understand, or did you just like the idea? And when that moment arrives, everything changes again. Let's get into that now, because the next part is where many people get stuck, but those who get through it never go back to being who they were. Now you see love in a way that many people take years or a lifetime to discover. What you've understood here is already beginning to change your energy, your relationships, and especially how you treat yourself internally. And when something transforms you like this, the natural reaction is to expand. You've received clarity, lightness, and awareness, and this movement deserves to circulate. So leave a like and subscribe. It's your way of giving back this expansion to the universe and helping more people awaken to this kind of love that builds, not one that binds. And comment below with the word amplitude. That way I know you're moving at that higher vibration, and your comment helps other people get into that frequency too. Now stay with me, because the next video will open an even bigger door. You've discovered how awakening changes the way you love, and the next step is understanding how that changes the way you live. It's now that you'll start noticing signs, connections, and movements that seem like coincidences, but aren't. Come along, because what awaits you now is a level above, and you'll feel it firsthand.